Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome for this very first edition of Explore Tech proposed by Natixis CIB. Whether you're here in the room or joining us remotely, I know many of you are joining us online. Thank you very much indeed for your presence. I'm Sylvain Sanjalms, and I will be accompanying you all through the day, and I'm delighted to be with you for the first edition. For a day, as you have seen on the program, with different very salient moments, I'd like to emphasize the presence of some people, Secretary of State for Digital Transition and Electronic Communications, Mr. Cédric O. Thank you, Minister, for being with us. Also the presence of Mr. Luc Julia. Thank you very much for being with us. Chief Scientific Officer, Renault Group, to mention but these two, because we'll have a lot of other speakers present on the stage. Now, this is a day that will allow you to meet, to have an exchange between you, so that you know, be the key actors of French tech, whether you're key players of the French tech or entrepreneurs in all sectors. What are the trends in the field of tech? What are the mutual opportunities to come? That is at the very heart of the first edition of Explore Tech. Now, this is a day during which you will be invited to participate in different roundtables in the two sessions, three sessions with two roundtables: energy, mobility, and health. Ladies and gentlemen, this event is supposed to be very interactive, whether you're here in the room or joining us remotely. At the end of some of the presentations, you will be able to ask questions, and I will relay them here on this stage. One last recommendation before starting off our afternoon. May I invite you to place your smartphone in aeroplane mode. Thank you very much in advance. So we are going to go into the heart of the matter by welcoming right away the Chief Executive Officer of Natixis, Mr. Nicolas Namias. Under your applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Bonjour, bonjour à tous.
Hello everybody. Hello, Sylvain. So you are now going to open this first Explore Tech Day. Thank you very much. I'm going to be very brief because we have a wonderful program altogether this afternoon. I just wanted to say a few words to introduce this afternoon. First of all, I'm delighted to be with you, and thank you very much for all of you for being here. I wanted, of course, to welcome Cédric O, Secretary of State for the Digital Transition and Electronic Communications. Mr. Minister, dear Cédric, thank you very much for being with us. Of course, Laurent Mignon, Chairman of the Management Board and Chief Executive Officer, Groupe BPCE, will have an exchange with Cédric to share your vision with us and how BPCE Group sees tech and supports its customers, its clients in the field of tech. And thank you, of course, to our clients for being here, because this afternoon is there for you, to accompany you, and to see how together we can accompany your transition. And thank you to all the speakers, experts who will be talking this afternoon. And namely, you have mentioned Luc Julia, but also Jean-Louis Gasset. Thank you very much for being with us. And of course, the wholesale banking team, BCG team, with whom we work together, the Boston Consulting Group team, with whom we prepared this afternoon. First edition, because we are convinced that it is indeed essential, it is our role to accompany the major transitions of our clients. Now, these major transitions, there are several that we have in mind. Environmental transition, which is not going to be the subject of today, the social, societal transition, which is not at the heart of our debate today, and the tech transition, the digital transition. Our role is to accompany these transitions that the society is witnessing. Now, accompanying these transitions and the tech transition in particular, we want to to make it. And we have two ways of doing so. One is to accompany the discussion and an ecosystem which is in place. Natixis for several years has been committed in its exchanges, animating the different discussions with the CDOs of big groups, with the CDOs of techs, fintechs of France. And we have been managing an innovation club with Cedric, who's present here, that with Nicolas Guérin. Now, this innovation club that we've been managing and innovating for the last few years has contributed to the creation, with Cedric, of the digital mission of large corporations, large groups, that was created last year. So that's the first element. We are convinced that the subject of the tech transition really goes through these exchanges. Exchanges like the one we are having this afternoon around the study that we have carried out together with the BCG, and the investment and adoption of deep tech by companies. And there'll be a very detailed feedback of this survey. There's one fundamental conclusion as a takeaway, namely that investment in tech and deep tech has not stopped growing these last in recent times, including during the crises. If there was one figure to be remembered, 70% of the companies have accentuated their tech investment. The crisis has not slowed down the investment. On the contrary, the crisis that we have just gone through has actually enhanced investment in tech and in deep tech to 78%. So we are to accompany this tech transition with the whole ecosystem. The second is to accompany the corporations, the companies, our clients, through each of the transitions that you know of. And for this, we have one conviction. And our conviction is that you cannot respond to the needs of companies, the needs for their tech transition, silo by silo, financial product by financial product. You need to have a strategic dialogue on the tech transition of companies, of our clients. Now, this is an approach that we developed several years ago with some success concerning another transition, which is the environmental transition. We developed some years ago in Natixis a green hub, which actually allows you to put together skills of financing, investment, etc., which concern the environmental transition of our clients. It is the same intuition that we have today, and which has led us to create, and we are launching it today at the same time as the Explore Tech meeting, to create a tech hub in Natixis, which will actually allow, in the dialogue that we have with you, with our clients, to have a global approach on all the needs and requirements that you are going to have in your tech transition. In this tech hub, of course, you'll have different competences, different skills, raising funds, M&A, advisory, project financing, listing on the stock exchange, etc. All these subjects will be dealt with by Natixis Tech Hub. And so this leads us to a meet today. On the one hand, this conviction that we have to crystallize, accompany this tech transition, that we have to do this through a dialogue and also through a strategic dialogue with each of you, thanks to the tech hub that we're creating today. So these are just some introductory words for this afternoon. These moments of exchange are going to be very rich and interesting, and they're going to be introduced by Cedric O, whom I am going to welcome now on stage, and he will be joined by Laurent Mignon a little later. Thank you.
Bonjour, bonjour à toutes.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking Natixis, Laurent Mignon, Nicolas Namiès, and Nicolas Guérin to have invited me to speak to you about this subject, and it's a great pleasure for me to do so alongside Luc Julia. And he's come with a flowery shirt, and mine is a little more classic. It is all very interesting to talk to him. And Jean-Louis Gasset, they're not here just like that. They've been at the Silicon Valley, and they've been part of this American adventure which built the American prosperity of the last years. And I think that it is great that we be able to weave this link between the French, some who coming back to help the French groups in transforming and to learn from what they have learned. Now, I think in Nicolas' introduction, there was one element which is really key and central concerning the subject you spoke about. You're going to speak about innovation all day. But I think that the question of innovation is only the tip of the iceberg. Now, what is really at stake and what we are experiencing today is the transition. And that is what Nicolas was saying a while ago. We are experiencing our companies, our businesses, our societies, our government going through major transition, which is the environmental and digital transitions. Now, if you were to look at take a macro view of this digital transition, the best way to have a historical comparison would be this double transformation of mechanization, the coming of electricity and steam at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Now, if you look at what this transformation has changed, it's changed everything. It's, of course, changed the economic situation. New companies emerged, and they took the place of other very big companies that had made up for the prosperity of the nations in the 19th and the 18th centuries. And so even the power play between countries changed. And in fact, it's quite interesting to see that China disappears from the concert of nations. And a few decades later, it comes back at the favor of a new technological revolution. So that's the modification of social democracy and the changes in the relations with the appearance of trade unions, class, and the way industry is structured. That's a modification of relationship to distance, because with electricity and railway, change of the way in which we look at life, improvement of standard of living, and interpersonal relations, because abolition of distances, conception of the self in a collective, like a class, and no longer as an individual. So if you take the digital revolution, it's exactly the same thing. It changes the economic power play between societies. And everybody feels this with the emergence of the new economy, which in the US has really swept away many companies that we knew. Modification of the relations between nations, as I was mentioning, the power play, and the return of China in a very strong way, the concert of nations and technological competition, and modification of social relations because of Uberization of the economy and the emergence of entrepreneurs, and change in democracy because social networks, because information bubbles, and even the relationship to the body. When the mechanization came, there was a modification of perception of work, and today through social networks and the Uberization, you have these similar changes taking place. So this has hit all our economies, but much more, it's a transformation which is anthropological. Now, the difficulty in this situation, the challenges, the difficulty in these big transformations is that, as I was saying, these are times of big change, major changes. Now, these are moments where you actually question the power of nations, the place of nations in the world, but also the place of companies and corporations in the world. It is for this reason that for the last 4 years with this government, and this had started a little before, but with this government in particular, we made innovation an element which is key, central to the French economic policy. But that's not totally new, of course, when you think about the revolutions that I mentioned. Now, why are we here today? Why or how our social model, our educational model, and so forth? If we are here today, is because there have been two technological revolutions, end of 19th century, beginning 20th century, and post-1945. Now, it's because in beginning 20th century, you had men and women who accepted to manipulate radioactivity and climb onto aeroplanes and invent, take risks, and invest, that we created all the economic and financial champions, industrial champions that we know today in railways, in chemicals, automobile, aerospace, etc. It's because in the second industrial revolution, after 1945, between 45 and 1960, under the impetus of General de Gaulle, there was a policy of reindustrialization with the nuclear, energy, transportation, the automobile. And that at that time emerged new companies. Very often the companies that then became giants, which seems quite normal to us today, were not the companies that were in place then. It's because we had two waves of entrepreneurship that we have the social model that we have today. And so what is playing out today, and why we see the results that we are seeing today in terms of innovation in the digital in France are very important. Because what is happening deeply in an international competition, and we understand it's a very, very strong competition, it is nothing more or less than the place of French economy, France, our economic model, our place for the next 50 years, which is being played out. So these companies, these new companies of the French tech, these startups, which, representing the French economy, you see the French economy, creation of jobs, there's been a multiplication by 4 of the money invested in 4 years' time in tech. The jobs in the digital today is the second largest number, creation of jobs. Last week I was in Nantes. It's 10,000 jobs in 7 years. In Lyon, where I come from, the Lyon region, the digital is more jobs than pharma. When you realize the importance of pharmaceuticals, that shows you the importance of betting on innovation. This innovation is an opportunity, historical opportunity, because there are French innovators, and look, Julia will tell you about it. We have nothing to shy off, and we've done everything in terms of the taxes and finance to keep them back, and it's important to have days like today, because if I may be a bit provocative, we have to be truthful. You can't, on the one hand, have world sort of international forecasts that of disappearance of the 50% of the companies as we know them, and consider that the same thing will not actually happen in France. So what I'm saying is that in the years to come, theoretically, if you actually follow the forecasts, 45 to 50% of the companies of the CAC 40 are going to actually disappear. So in beginning 20th century and post-1945 is the disappearance of the empire. There's a very interesting book by Paul David that talks about the transition of mechanization and the disappearance without much noise of draperies, textile, enormous power, economic, political in Northern Europe, which overnight just disappear. And so the whole subject that actually arises, which is economic, but also democratic, because a big transition, as Gramsci says, the former world dies, a new world isn't here yet, so it's that day-night, the monsters appear in that twilight. The economic world, to bring out new champions, we need new champions. The average age of the CAC 40 is over 100 years old. We need new, fresh blood. And at the same time, succeed in the transition of the big groups, the transition of the economy. We have to succeed in it, and that is truly important, and that's why this big transition that we're living through, this economic transition, but which is more a transition, more than an economic transition, is a societal transition. Second element, which is panning out, is in the capacity to manage this transition. Now, these major transitions are factors for great opportunities. The digitalization of the economy, data economy, opening in terms of transport, environmental efficiency. Imagine, how much the environmental issue is a mathematical one. More and more people, 1/3 of humans living with under €3 a day, and resources which are limited worldwide. So it's quite simple, the equation, the intensity, carbon intensity of each a unit of the earth which is consumed increase. The efficiency basically, of our own organizations, and the functioning of our democratic societies must increase, the efficiency must increase, otherwise there'll be tension on the resources, and there'll be societal problems that we see when we try to reduce the consumption of petrol, increasing the taxes on petrol. Things don't turn out very well, believe me. We need greater efficacy. There's a mathematical theory of information communication which says something simple: more there's intelligence in the system, more there's an information in the system, the more it is efficient. So the transformation of our society, digital transformation, is an extraordinary opportunity, even in health. But it is the factor of a lot of tension and centrifugal forces. So we see to what extent we are, really in the middle of a tension societally, democratically, between, on the one hand, this world which is moving ahead very fast, this injunction, this order to innovate, and on the other, the part of the society which, but it's also the two parts of the French soul, more skeptical.
Plus sécessionniste. En tout cas, inquiète à l'idée de ce changement. Et d'ailleurs, quand on regarde l'histoire de France, on alterne entre ce génie français, ces inventeurs, ces ingénieurs, ces médailles Fields, ces prix Nobel dont on est si fiers tous, parce qu'ils font rayonner notre modèle, parce qu'ils font rayonner la France, et puis des périodes un peu plus noires de l'histoire de France où on laisse un peu plus libre cours à la jalousie, à la peur, au repli sur soi. L'histoire de la France, on ne va pas rappeler des épisodes on va dire, noir de l'histoire de France, c'est une tension entre ces deux mots. Et on voit qu'aujourd'hui, nous sommes dans cette tension. C'est-à-dire que nous avons ces deux récits qui s'affrontent. Bien sûr, d'un côté, le renouveau de l'innovation française porte un motif d'espoir, porte un motif d'ailleurs de réussite de la France à l'international, de réussite de projection de prospérité à long terme et même de projection des valeurs qui sont les valeurs européennes. Mais de l'autre côté, on le voit d'ailleurs dans le moment de la pandémie qu'on a vécu, il y a le doute sur le progrès, les anti-vax, les anti-5G, si je ne veux pas tout réduire à ça. Et les deux récits s'affrontent. Et donc, dans cette nécessité de se saisir de l'innovation, dans cette volonté de se projeter d'une certaine manière, de manière optimiste dans l'avenir, en considérant qu'il y a des très gros problèmes, il y a des défis, il y a des inégalités, la transition environnementale, et que l'innovation
there are difficulties, but innovation can be part of the solution. And France and Europe, because we have engineers and researchers, we can be a global player for the global economic prosperity and to find solutions. When it comes to these topics and to fight against some of these negative forces. But this is a fight we're fighting right now. It is not just a fight to create jobs and industrial power. It's a fight that is civilizational in nature and that helps in projecting our country into the future. And what I'm convinced of is that because we have the brains, we have the academics, the researchers, and because innovation is on the one hand brains, but on the other hand, it's capital. We used to have brains without capital for many reasons, but reforms were implemented, and now we have capital. Capital is flowing in. France is now the first foreign investment destination in the world, and so we have very good reasons to be optimistic. But it is a fight that we have to keep fighting. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, merci pour ces propos. Justement, il y a donc certainement des questions, puisqu'il y a des temps forts, comme je le disais en préambule, où on échange justement avec le public en présentiel ou en distance. Alors voilà, si vous souhaitez justement poser peut-être une question suite à l'intervention de Cédric O, uniquement en salle, peut-être une question? Non? Pas de questions, je crois que alors soit tout a été dit, tout est clair, voilà.
C'est ça.
C'est une question, c'est ça. Pardon.
So we have a question. We have a question in the room. Hello, Cédric. During the France Digital Day, you spoke about the CAC 40. And I'd like to know, and you said you needed fresh blood. So what's your ambition when it comes to French tech companies and IPOs? There's maybe a certain delay when it comes to we're a bit behind the NASDAQ when it comes to the French situation. Well, this is a central topic. We can see that there is a transformation of French capitalism going on right now, especially when it comes to venture capital, with growth of the French venture capital ecosystem, which is partly fed from abroad. But apart from certain niches which are important in their own way, but usually you finance projects with private capital. And you can see that you can raise 200, 300, 400 million euros in private investment. That's not a problem. But what we would like is to have more French private capital. But if you look at Israel, who are even bigger than us, we've just overtaken them. So we're not teaching them anything here, but they've created companies that are bigger than ours with 90% of foreign capital. So we would like to see some more French private capital. We're going to work on this at the European level. We've done that with what we call the TB funds, but things are generally going quite well when it comes to private capital. But there are questions raised about when it comes to public capital. Our takeaway is that with Brexit, there will be an emergence of a European NASDAQ, a continental NASDAQ, if you will. We can see this today when you have tech companies that are moving to Stockholm, Amsterdam, like Spotify or Togen or Billy. So you have to remember this dynamic. If OVH works well, we'll have two companies that will be on the French stock exchange that will represent over 2 billion euros. This is much more than we've had in the past. In the past, there was only Dassault Systems and Worldline that were such important companies here. So there is this factor of acceleration that's very important, and we believe that because there's this dynamic of French tech that's based on private capital, there are many French tech companies that will enter the stock exchange with IPOs in the next 10 years. So what we think will happen is that there'll be a convergence of the continental situation into one place, because there'll be research, there'll be investors there, because there'll be management teams, then there'll be a good atmosphere in the country. And we can succeed in doing that in France. And we can make Euronext into the tech hub of continental Europe. Now, of course, that's something we need to work on. There's issues when it comes to the presence of investment funds. So that's why in the TB funds, we decided to devote 6 billion to financing tech and to keep 3 billion on the side, because we want to have these global tech teams in Paris. Now, at first, they will trade on NASDAQ and Hong Kong. But as French companies have their IPOs, a lot of them will have IPOs in Paris, and we will have the opportunity to create this ecosystem. And that's the idea of French tech. There's no silver bullet. There's no measure that will allow us to solve everything overnight to create this ecosystem. We need research. We need investors. We need the right teams. And we believe that if we can create this sort of ecosystem, we'll be able to win this other fight. Because if we want to have a sovereign ecosystem at a global scale, we need to be able to have the full financing chain here. This starts with business angels and it ends with the IPO. So that's an essential element in the current landscape. Thank you very much. Maybe another question. Well, there's lots of questions in the room. I can see lots of people want to have questions to ask. Well, yes, I agree completely. The biggest French IPO on the NASDAQ is Gemplus 2001. And that will maybe change now. My second question is a bit of a criticism. Not a criticism of you, but of French tech. We always talk about the sums raised. And And what's important is creating value. It's not the money that's invested, but the value that's created afterwards. And that's important. We need to talk about that more. We're entering this virtuous period. Up until now, Sweden was ahead of us, so was Germany. I'm wondering if Estonia was ahead of us even. But now, we're starting to see that French tech is creating an enormous amount of value, and I think we need to communicate more about that. That's something that we need to highlight more. So that's more a comment than a question. Well, thank you very much. There's a big debate even within French tech. The next 40, which is an index created by the government to determine which are the 40 companies that are the most interesting companies in French tech, which is a reference for France. But this is based on the funds raised. And so there were debates with ecosystem representatives to see what's the importance of raising funds, or should we use like jobs created, for example, as an index. But these criteria were chosen by entrepreneurs, and you can criticize this focus on the funds raised, on the investment. But I have two things to say about that. First of all, the investments by investors and foreign investors as well is an objective criteria that allows us to evaluate the trust that people have in your ecosystem. Do people want to put their money in France rather than in Germany? That is the best evaluation to see whether people have this trust in the general trends of your economy. Is that trust greater in France or in Germany? Because there's as many companies that are looking for investments in Germany as there are in France. So as such, with all the problems linked to this criteria, it is a investment criteria that allows for international comparison, and that's why we're using it. And it's also a very interesting criteria that allows us to say to ourselves that people have four times more trust in the French economy today than they did 15 years ago. Otherwise, they wouldn't be investing so much. Now, of course, there's issues with international liquidity. Laurent Mignon could tell us that there are some theoretical issues of denominators that could be mentioned. But in any case, what you'll have to admit, and that's the second thing, is that it's a good way to look at your comparative attractivity. So in a world where the tech world is different than the rest of the world, when you consider there might only be one or two winners, and so you have to be quick. The idea is not to make a lot of money. The idea is you have to kill your competition. Of course, you could say that's not the right way of working, that you have to set up good antitrust measures, but that's what's going on. Amazon is not earning a lot of money, even they've started earning money in 2020, but other than Amazon Web Services, they're not actually making that much profit. They're losing money. They're making profits in the US, but they're losing money in the rest of the world. So I'm not saying whether I like this type of economy or not, but it's the person who manages to raise funds the fastest kills the others. And of course, I prefer French companies to be able to succeed rather than Germans or Americans. So that's why I've chosen this criteria. So we are having these interesting exchanges, and I'll take a few more questions, but we have a remote question, first of all, from Benoît Ménard, who has the following question. Altis is leaving the stock exchange. What do you think about this? I think this reflects an overvaluation of telecom by investors. So I think it makes sense. If you take Iliad, who I think had their IPO about 15 years ago, thereabouts, and their value's gone up 12-fold since then, and now they're undervalued by investors. But that's kind of logical when you look at the investments they have in front of them, and the pressure is that they are not so interested in these issues now. So I think it's about cycles. It depends how the situation of the telecom industry is, and then when things get better, they will come back to the stock exchange, of course. But a few years ago, before COVID, there was the issue of delisting a lot of biotech companies because they were overvalued. But the question is whether in the economic conditions that you're in, and given the market conditions and the investors' mood, do you base yourself on telecom? Like if you look at a company like Orange, what makes up Orange isn't really reflected by its stock value. This is just my personal opinion, but I think it is quite logical to remove these companies from stock exchange when their real value is not represented on the market. Thank you very much. There's a lot of you who are following remotely, so please don't hesitate to ask more questions. We have another question at the back of the room. Yes? Yes. Thank you for being here, Minister. And thank you for giving us this overview of innovation and talking about the long term, the importance of the long term. You're talking about a diptych that's quite interesting about talent on the one hand and money on the other. I think we are all familiar with this logic. But maybe we could see it as a triptych. What do you think the challenges are? What do we have to solve as a nation when it comes to public platforms for research, for fundamental research? Is it just the private market that has to deal with this, or is there something that we can do? We know that China has a plan for this. Well, I think China actually has not abandoned their plan, but their decision to take control of some of the large technology companies is the best news for French and for European and American innovation, because I'm convinced of one thing, and that's that a state cannot really innovate. A state doesn't know how to innovate. It's not what it's meant for. A state is there to create conditions for innovation, and that's the story of French tech. No one decided that Dr. Libre Miracle would be able to work. What we did was we created the ecosystemic conditions by creating the reforms of various taxes, of the labor market, and without that you wouldn't have French tech. This is what attracted foreign investment. This meant that France could join international norms when it came to taxation, for example. We have natural assets, the quality of information, of training, the quality of the living conditions here, and this is what makes things work. And I deeply believe that the role of the state is to create the right conditions so that entrepreneurs and innovators can create innovation in conditions of which, of course, education is part of that, higher education is part of that. So when I talk about talent, I'm also talking about training talent and, of course, attracting talent. There's foreign talent that can join us, because America, for example, was based on buying talent from abroad, Nigerians, Indians, and so on and so forth. So we have to do the same thing. We have to train more people, but we have to attract more people and retrain more people, which, of course, is a topic that's very often something we deal with. There's many people in large companies, in small and medium enterprises that have to be retrained. So this is something very, very important. We need to transform our higher education. And our research has to work more with entrepreneurship. We need to finance fundamental research. But the problem there today is not a deficit of a lack of public funds, but of private capital. So our goal today as a state is to create the right conditions. And that's not something that can be done by decree. As soon as when I read in the press that we have to create an Airbus of artificial intelligence, is something that really shocks me, because that's not something that you can really do. It's a French entrepreneur or a German entrepreneur that will create a company between the two nations and will be able to do something that way. So I fundamentally think that's the solution. And I really think that there is this issue of talent and capital. And the state, of course, does have a role to play in the structuring of this ecosystem. Okay, we only have a couple more minutes to maybe take one or two more questions. There's a gentleman here, and we'll bring you a microphone. In the meantime, we've received a question online from Thomas Sadjian. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. And I'll read this to you. Starting from a certain level of 500 million euros, we can see that there's a lack of resources among French investors, but not among American investors. What do you think about this? Is this a link to bad a misuse of French savings. Well, it's not for me to solve problems with French savings. It's people who have to deal with savings themselves. But there is a macroeconomic statement, which is that Americans don't save, Europeans do save, but they don't really like risk very much, so they don't really invest into high-risk investments. So what's least risky is American bonds, and so a lot of our investments finance American bonds. So when Americans invest into French companies, it's just money that's coming home. You have to bear this in mind. I mean, this is a bit of a simplification, but it is quite true. The French decide to put their savings wherever they want. We have choices when it comes to taxation and budget, but what we need to do is to reintroduce risk culture in France. It's not just a tech problem, it's a problem of underfinancing French companies in general, and that's a problem that's quite widely known. But we are trying to do things, and that's what we did by discussing with investors at the TB initiative, and that led to an investment of 3 billion euros, or a total of 6 billion euros, that was invested into venture capital funds. And this allowed one of the French venture capital funds to become one of the major French venture capital funds. But we have to get to the next stage. In the venture capital funds that are over 1 billion euros, there's 2 in Europe, equity and 0, whereas America has 40 such funds. So we're carrying out discussions with our foreign partners right now in order to be able to create a venture capital industry in Europe. But this is important. It is something we're working on. We would like to have more European venture capital, but basically when money is being invested, be it American, Middle Eastern or French, I'd prefer this money to be invested in France rather than elsewhere. And so I'm very happy that there's so much international investment in France.
Okay, we're now going to wrap up with a final question. The gentleman in the front here, please. My name is Bertrand Langlois from Technique Énergie. You've outlined the issues perfectly well when it comes to climate change and when it comes to digital transition. You're here to speed up these transitions and the pickup in these technological changes. But we also see that the environmental impact of these new technologies will have some consequences on climate change going forward. So could you tell us a bit how you can reconcile these two transitions, speeding up technological change on one hand, whilst going towards, a greener world? And you have 2 minutes to answer the question. Well, look, my opinion is really clear-cut on this issue. I think that you need to bear in mind the big trends. If you go to Paris-Nice twice a year, then it's the same amount than using your computer all year round. And of course, in the area of digital, we need to work much more. We mustn't renew our devices so often. But we also need to make a lot of progress. We need to have more digital tools. The environmental transition is really about maths more than anything else. We need to be more efficient. If we can digitalize everything, connect everything, and save up 15% of energy in agriculture, logistics, industry, then we will be successful, in spite of the fact that we will have to consume more energy if all these devices are connected. It works out, it evens out if we are 100% digital. Now, some people say the more digital you go, the more you're going to pollute, but it's not the case. You have to look at the costs and the benefits. When you look at the IPCC report and you read that the impact of technology on climate change is only measured in light of the telecom industry, it's just not enough. So of course, yes, we need to reduce our energy consumptions. We need to have screens and devices that run on batteries that are more efficient. It's not the data centers that are making up the bulk of energy consumption. If we want to reconcile all of this whilst pursuing growth, then we need to be more efficient and therefore more digital. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming over this afternoon. A big hand for the Minister, please. Sorry, I just have a final word I'd like to say, and a message that I'd like to try and get across. All the large companies are reducing their environmental footprints for all their digital investments. I can see a lot of patterns, a lot of things that are not taken into account, these mega trends, and also the fact that your software has to be renewed on a regular basis, and your machine float. The data centers are nice to have, they're not must-haves. So if you look into digital investment, go and talk to your American partners about the planned obsolescence of their software, or built-in obsolescence of their software. Okay, well, thank you very much. We're now going to have the chairman of the management board and chief executive officer of the BPCE Group, Laurent Mignon.
Bonjour Laurent Mignon, peut-être.
Good afternoon, Laurent Mignon. Maybe you could start with a little comment on what Mr. Cédrico has just said. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Minister for coming over this afternoon. It was very interesting to listen to your talk. It's always nice to take a look at things from a fresh angle and to talk about this transition. You talked about mutation. And yes, it's true, it's a true revolution that is currently underway. I think that the 20 years ahead of us are going to be more revolutionary, more innovative than the previous 100 years. There will be a huge digital transition and a huge environmental transition that don't always go hand in hand, but nonetheless, they are going to significantly change the way in which we live across the world. I should also like to reassure you, our company, BPCE, was born out of the first revolution some 200 years ago, so we weathered the second revolution, and we're going to take this one on as well, the third revolution. We are no longer on the stock exchange, we're no longer on the CAC 40, because we believe that the valuation of the banks were not good enough, so it was not interesting for us to be listed on the stock exchange. So we're not part of the 50% who are going to disappear that you mentioned earlier, but we're going to strive to be a part of the 50% that are going to survive. And I believe that the world in the future will need more funding going forward, and that's why I should like to congratulate Natixis for creating this tech hub, because we need to put together the ecosystem that will allow French tech to grow. And that means IPOs, it means also fundraising. It also means that we need to bring into the fold private equity funds so that they can work on the early stage and late stage development, which is, sometimes tricky to get right. And I think that with the teams here at Natixis, we are in a position where we can build this ecosystem. Tech companies are completely different to companies in the health sector or industry. So we need to have tech experts. Hence, I think the decision of setting up the Natixis Tech Hub. So it's a very important part of the transition. And we need also to change the way we do things, because a large company such as our own needs to survive, wants to survive, and we want to survive for the next, I don't know, 200 years or so. We were born out of this first revolution that I mentioned earlier, and then when trains were the cutting edge in terms of innovation. And when it comes to equity, it's not just about United States. I mean, it's about retirement and pension funds. French savings is invested in short-term products because we don't have pension funds, unlike the United States. So, of course, it's quite complicated when you've got your 401k in the US that goes up and down with the stock exchange. But when it comes to funding growth, it works really well. What we need to do is to think about pension funds and maybe pensions more broadly. I know that there are some reforms in the pipeline in France. Okay, that was not an official statement from the French government. It was just your opinion. Not just before the elections in France. The timing might not be right. But I understand that the president has a couple of ideas up his sleeve. Okay, we're going to go back to the transformation that you outlined earlier. You manage a large banking group. You work alongside companies, private individuals. What are you going to do when it comes to this transformation? How are you going to address it? Well, it's true that there are a lot of issues at play here. There are not a lot of industries. If you consider finance to be an industry, I believe that it is one. I think it's, in fact, a very significant industry in France because we've got large banks in our country that are a huge asset for our economic development. But we don't have a lot of industries like finance, apart maybe music, that are completely digitalized. I mean, what we do is just codes and numbers. There are a few banknotes lying around, but that's, you know, it's pretty much numbers. There's nothing tangible, really, that you can hold. There's money, of course, but it's all digitalized. So, potentially, we can be transformed like, you know, Uber transformed the ride industry. If you want to do music, if you want to put music on a digital platform, it's very easy. So for banking, it's a bit slower, but there's a potential for all of banking to be digital. And we do wonder sometimes, are we going to disappear in the future? Because banking can be done in a completely different way and completely digitally. So we're still raising questions. We don't have a lot of answers because we've got clients, we've got branches and brick and mortar branches all across the country. And I think that in light of all of this, what we believe is that we're not going to have two separate worlds with tech on one side and the old world on the other hand. Because if you do this, you're just going to pit them one against the other and say that one is dying and the other one is growing. And if you do this, it's very difficult to strike the right balance, because the old world might die out faster than the new world will grow. So it's a very difficult balance to strike. So the way we look at it is to say we can only be successful by transforming ourselves from within. So this is why we've got our digital inside strategy. Okay, so we've copied maybe the name from an American company, but digital inside, what does it mean? It means that we're the only banking group in France that hasn't developed neobank. We don't have like Bonjour Bank or Hello Bank, or I can't remember what it's called. It's not Beefer Bank. We don't have that kind of service. And the simple reason behind this is that we wanted to allocate all our investments to transforming our banks. So we've invested in digital, so we've got a digital hub, so not a tech hub with expertise for our clients, but a tech hub that we call the 89C3. So it's BPCE, but digitalized, that's the name. That's what Yves Tirode explained to me when he came up with the idea. So we brought in experts from the telecom industry and we built dedicated teams. And we are transforming our companies. We created some digital applications that are best in class at the moment. And today, our digital applications are really the best in class, like N26, like Revolut. They have the same features and the same capacity. And that is what I believe is important. I want our clients to stay with us, not because we're going to offer a cheaper price, but because the digital performance that we offer is the same or better than our competition. And currently, we've got 10 million clients who are connected to our digital applications. And that's a huge marketplace. 90% of the transfers that are made via mobile phones. People don't go into our branches to transfer money. 60% of our clients connect at least once a month or on a regular basis on their applications. And we still have a network of branches across the country. So we have to transform the way in which we give advice to people when they come to the bank. And some clients sometimes, yes, they want to buy a house, they want to take out a loan, they want to invest their savings. It's an important turning point in their life. So we need to have someone who can advise them face to face, and that is very helpful, much more helpful than doing that over the phone or on your phone. So this is what we're trying to transform, and we want to transform things from the inside. And it's not easy, and it also means that all our tech investment goes into this transformation from the inside. And we also focus a lot on data. We invest some 400 million euros, or across the next 3 years anyway, for data. So huge investments. And we have reallocated our IT investment towards tech. Now, we are not a tech company yet, but nonetheless, we are focusing a lot of our investment in tech. And that's a bit of a wager, because a lot of people say there's going to be a world that's going to die away, fade out, and a new world is going to grow. But we believe that there are some areas where we can't go alone. For example, for payments and online transactions and e-commerce. With e-commerce, you don't even pay, with a credit card. It's all digitalized. So this kind of transformation and the development of e-commerce is something that we need to get on board with. And we can't do this on our own. So we rely on fintech players who are digital players. And we bought Natixis, Tenplug, who really help us in this area. But what we try to do is not to kill them when we buy them. This is something that we work a lot on. We try and allow them to have enough leeway so that they can thrive. We've got the Yves Tirode cluster, the digital cluster, which is now called Digital Innovation and Data and Payments cluster. And payments used to be a back office process. It's now become a huge area for innovation and investment. But we're coming up against players who are developing really quickly or growing very quickly. And earlier we were discussing this. When a fintech company raises money and invests, it's an investment. In other words, it creates value. It doesn't really matter if they make any money at the beginning or not. When you make an investment at the very beginning, you lose money. Large companies try to create value when it comes to tech investment, but over the long term. Now, it's easier to do this when you are not listed. It's a real advantage from that standpoint. We can focus on the long term because of the nature of our group, rather than just working on a kind of quarterly stock exchange basis. And even if you set aside the digital aspects, it doesn't work. The market still judge you on the overall picture. So you've got a lot of companies who become R&D centers, a bit like biotech companies who became R&D for the pharmaceutical industry. So we're trying to reconcile all of this, so keeping an eye on what's going on, remaining an investor in private equity for fintech so that we have a presence in the ecosystem, and then we invest massively in tech. This is how we try to transform ourselves from the inside. And our company that is more than 200 years old, I hope can weather this new revolution, and I hope that we can continue with our investments and our transformation. Well, all the very best to you. Thank you very much, and a big hand to our two speakers.
Merci beaucoup, Cédric O. Merci.
Laurent Mignon, Cédric O, thank you very much. A big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much. So now we're going to continue with some exclusive information. Now, this was alluded to at the beginning of the afternoon. We're going to look at the survey results of the survey, the Expertech survey that was mentioned before. It is the very first survey that has been ordered with the Boston Consulting Group. And in order to know what the results are, I would like you to welcome Thibaut Cuillère, who's the head of real asset research at Natixis CIB, and Amine Benaya, managing director and partner of the Boston Consulting Group. So please be seated, make yourself comfortable, so as to give us some feedback on this survey. And I would like to remind you again that this is the very first Natixis BCG survey. Good afternoon, everyone. Together with Amine, we're delighted to be able to present to you in as an exclusivity the results of this survey. And the results came out today. So what was the purpose of this survey? It was to understand how European companies really invest in tech, and more specifically in deep tech. So could you please bring your microphone a bit closer so that everybody can understand you better? So what do we mean when we talk about deep tech? Let's have a little glossary here, because we're going to be discussing this throughout the day. When we talk about deep tech, it means really advanced technologies based on groundbreaking innovations, especially in uses. And this is exactly what was mentioned by the minister and Nicolas and Laurent. It is a true industrial revolution. So a bit later on, we're going to come up with concrete examples of what kind of revolution this brought about. So what was our process to conduct the study? Well, first of all, we worked with a number of companies. We co-built the questionnaire with a number of corporations, with about 30 one-on-one interviews, and I would like to thank all of those who participated in the initial questionnaire. Before we launched the survey between the end of April and the beginning of July of this year. Now, this survey was aimed at company managers or members of CVC or M&A teams, and also people in charge of research and development teams or digital transformation teams within the corporations. So we started with a number of large corporations, as I mentioned before, and then we realized that it would be interesting to actually extend this to a number of startup companies. And I would like to thank Arnaud de Latour, who helped us here to increase the number of respondents substantially. So altogether, we managed to have 226 responses to this questionnaire, with a number of respondents per industry. And then we segmented the results in 10 different industries. And so this allowed us to define trends per industry. And you will see that the investment trends in tech depend very much on the type of business the companies are in. So, of course, we looked at the impact of COVID and the pandemic on the way companies invest. And this is what Nicolas was referring to before. Only 12% of companies tell us that they have somewhat slowed down the investment rate. The 78% mentioned by Nicolas before are here. We have about 40% who have that have maintained their pre-COVID-19 level. And we have about 40% that have accelerated their investment commitments. And retail and communication industries are particularly to be mentioned in this particular category, which we can understand because of the impact of COVID-19. So we also asked the companies what it is that they do with this investment to understand at what part of the investment cycle they are, what part of the innovation cycle they are. And we see that a lot of them are at proof of concept and others are beyond. About a fourth of them tell us that they're implemented at scale in concrete use cases. So then the second question is, why is it that European companies invest in deep tech today? And here on the left-hand graph, you can see that the major reason why they decide to invest in deep tech is looking for a competitive advantage in the long term. Then comes experimenting with proof of concept, in other words, looking at the business feasibility of a given technology. And way before, actually, the quest for short-term ROI, because indeed, we're talking about technologies that are not yet mature. Let's take a concrete example in the cosmetics industry, for instance, when we talk about looking for competitive advantage. Now, in cosmetics research, there are two major trends today which have to do with tech. One is looking for products that are more environmentally friendly. And here, obviously, the biotech industry has a role to play. And then there's research in improving customer experience with products that are increasingly personalized, customized. And, for instance, looking for foundation products or lipstick that are personalized. And with 3D research, it's possible. And deep tech makes it possible. And then to the right, you see that beyond the building long-term advantage, we have 54% of companies that also consider that investment in deep tech will allow them to reach or facilitate the reaching of climate goals and environmental goals. And this echoes what was said by the minister before. In other words, in areas such as chemistry, energy, transportation, this is really the case. This is very obvious. So let me give you a few concrete examples. In chemistry, for instance, looking for coatings or paints that are more environmentally friendly, or also biopolymers, for instance. In transportation, we have the development around the ecosystem around hydrogen, so as to decarbonize public transportation, for instance. And then if we talk about energy, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the development, the technologies being developed around carbon capture. And this will allow the research will allow us to accelerate the development of these technologies, and we could see that, of course, this has a major role to play in the future. But there's very little impact on social aspects or governance, where companies have doubts. Now, after we talked about why, we're going to talk about how. How do companies invest in deep tech? What you see on the left-hand side of the graph is that most of the investment is done directly through three different channels, the direct investment as such, then through corporate venture capital, and finally, indirectly through funds. And you can see that there's a vast majority of companies that today invest in the context of direct investment, and they want to increase this their investment through the direct channel. And the result of the surveys actually show that there's been an acceleration of this particular channel since the COVID-19 outbreak. However, it's not the only channel, and in particular, CVCs have a role to play in tech development for European companies. In fact, 30% of the persons surveyed have told us that they have already set up a CVC. And when they don't have enough money to invest in technologies that are not yet mature, CVCs are really an interesting opportunity, are really an interesting alternative, because they give capital, they make capital available, which is the very first reason why companies decide to have a CVC. And there is a whole section in the survey dedicated to CVCs. Now, another question, what are the most disruptive technologies in deep tech today? And we will see later on how this differentiates depending on the industries concerned. So let's look first of all at the technologies that already exist on the left-hand graph. First of all, artificial intelligence and big data, and we're going to have a speaker on this. Then the second thing is cloud and cybersecurity. In the context of cybersecurity, of course, here we have something which is very much impacted by the development of teleworking. And most European companies have finished their migration to the cloud, but not all of them, because, of course, this raises a number of complexity issues. And then there's a question of the allocation between the public and the private cloud. And then finally, another technology that mainly developed throughout the crisis is the distribution platforms and the supply chain applications. And the impact of COVID-19 was such on the supply chains that, of course, we understand now why these technologies, and in particular the marketplaces, are going to play an important role in future years to help companies develop in this particular context, despite the fact that supply chains might face difficulties. And when you look at artificial intelligence, I mean, this is something that we see everywhere. Then we have blockchain and virtual reality, together with advanced AI, which are felt to be the most disruptive deep tech trends. Now, we looked at the various cycles where the companies are, and the level of maturity perceived and the level of relevance perceived by companies. And we can see a fairly clear correlation, in fact. Contrary to the academic world and public research institutions, companies start positioning themselves once the technology is developed enough, has reached a certain level of maturity. The only exception is quantic systems, where even though the maturity level is less, it's still considered to have a colossal impact on the companies, and therefore they are looking into it already. So another thing that we were discussing before, there's a major difference between various industries. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of all figures because otherwise we'll be here until tonight. But let me give you a few examples. Let's take the healthcare industry. Of course, biotechs will be there. But what's really interesting is that in this sector, before the biotech, you have 65% of the players in the sector that consider that first it's artificial intelligence that's going to disrupt the industry. And we can think about the impact on medical imaging of AI, which will actually speed up analysis and diagnosis techniques. A few other examples. Blockchain. Blockchain comes second, but also comes at a leading position in the financial industry area. But what's surprising is to see that it's also very much present in a sector like energy and natural resources. So we can think that blockchain will have some impact on traceability of green energy, for instance. Another example is augmented reality and virtual reality. These are two sectors that there are two sectors that will be impacted by this technology: is the consumer retail and real estate. So tomorrow, for instance, when you're going to look for a new house with augmented reality, you'll be able to visualize this on your computer. So it's an improvement in the customer experience. Another example in real estate, for instance, is that you can have virtual visits, virtual tours of these new potential new homes. And this was actually accelerated during the COVID-19 crisis. Then we looked at the major challenges to face, because obviously adopting deep tech is not that easy. And this is really one of the main takeaways of the study, because we were expecting technological, financial, regulatory challenges in the use of data and so on. And yes, this came out of the survey. But what's really telling is that the two most widely quoted challenges is change management and the ability to attract new talents. So we're talking about deep tech, yes, but the main obstacles are of a human kind. We try to expand this a bit next time. But what we can draw by way of conclusion is that, first of all, this is an indicator of maturity, because in order to be able to manage transformation and change, and in order to consider attracting talent as a problem, you have to already be well advanced in adopting these new technologies. In other words, to sum up, technologies, data, financing, all of this is useful, is essential whenever you want to go all the way to the proof of concept. But when you want to go to scale, the human factor, the cultural factor, transformation management, change management, and so on, as you were saying before, is something that becomes really imperative. These become the main barriers to change. So indeed, we were talking about leading change. We were talking about the problems in attracting talents. These are the two main barriers. But of course, there are very major differences from one industry to the next. In particular, in some sectors, like the healthcare sector, for instance, the constraints that are linked to the fact that you're online with the regulatory constraints may lead companies to have some problems in digital transformation and to be in line with GDPR regulation, for instance. For capital-intensive industries like transportation and infrastructure, for instance, also it may be difficult to finance transformation on the basis of debt. And 33% of the respondents actually mentioned this. And sometimes it's difficult to find partners, equity partners. And this is particularly the case in the financial sectors and in the chemical sector. Finally, another last part of the survey, looking into digital assets. Now, when we talk about digital assets, of course, you think of cryptocurrencies, but there's not only cryptocurrencies in this category. And in fact, during this survey, we realized that there are many other crypto assets that are interesting for companies, like, for instance, the stable codes, the stable coins, and the tokens. Doesn't mean that the cryptocurrencies are of no interest to our companies, because as you can see on the left-hand side, 20% of respondents are interested in cryptocurrencies and crypto assets, and this may be a good opportunity for the diversification of cash flow, and also possibly offer some payment possibility for some of their clients. But beyond this, the big surprise actually has to do with the security tokens and real asset tokens, which really were mentioned more often than we thought. So what is a token? This is a digital representation of an asset that has been issued and exchanged on a blockchain. Then you have two main types of tokens: the security token, which is the digital representation of a security, and the real asset token, which is a real asset and its rights being registered on a blockchain, and which then will be exchanged on this platform. So indeed, yes, we note that these two assets are the ones that are most sought after by the customers, which may come as a surprise. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can note that in some industries, in particular in energy and transportation, this may be a major challenge. Now, in energy, of course, we can think of the tokenization of carbon credits, for instance, and in transportation, you may think of the ability tomorrow to be able to pay in a tokenized manner when you're actually charging your electric car, to give you two concrete examples. Now, based on all of these data, we conducted a statistical analysis to differentiate the industries depending on their appetite for digital investment and digital assets and the impact these digital assets are going to have on their activity. So this is what you can see on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you see those that are more interested in real asset tokens and those that are more interested in security tokens and stable coins. And you can see that you can order all industries based on their interest for one or the other categories, which means that all industries are going to be strongly impacted by the digital revolution. There will be some differences. We mentioned energy and transportation. We could also mention real estate, for instance, which tomorrow possibly will be impacted by the possibility to tokenize real estate assets, and therefore they'll be more easy to fraction, to be made more liquid on some platforms. A sector which today is not really impacted is the pharmaceutical and healthcare sector, as you can see to the bottom left. So what do companies tell us in terms of gaining expertise and accumulating experience? Nearly 90% of the respondents say that they operate in an open ecosystem whenever they're talking about innovation. When you look at the various number of trends and so on, it's difficult to imagine that you have all of this expertise internally, because they're fairly rare. Now, in detail, this may be via some public research institutions, the Hôpital Gustave Roussy with biotech and the pharma world. It may be via the academic world, universities, engineering schools, and so on. And also the most often mentioned channel is cooperation with one's peers, one's clients, one's suppliers, as we saw recently in the energy sector. And this is something that we see increasingly in a number of value chains where a steel producer, for instance, works with a car manufacturer because their interests are aligned in terms of decreasing their emissions. So this is a first stage that then allows companies to move to the two other steps. The second one being to start really sorting through all of these trends, filtering them, saying, okay, there are some specific deep techs that are of the most interest for me. And these are the startups where I'm going to start investing through CVC, as Thibault was mentioning before. And then we can move on to the third step that Laurent Mignon was referring to before, namely starting making targeted acquisitions, like the example of Natixis with PCB payment, so as to start integrating startups and preserving their DNA, their ability to innovate, and their speed and agility, and then move on to transformation to scale, as we said before, with change management, the fact that you can attract and retain talent and change organization and processes.
So if you were to take away 4 points, deep tech is a wave that the companies don't want to miss out on, with an acceleration in tech investments, which is going to continue directly and indirectly with investments in CVCs. Second important point is that techs are going to have a major role to play, and this was confirmed by the minister on the decarboning the footprint. And deep tech is tech, but it is also the human person culture. And to conclude, You have much more detail in the study that has just come out today, and we would like to thank all the other contributors to this study. There are many people who participated in preparing this study. And to conclude, we say, well, meet you in a year's time to see how the trends and the investment modalities in the tech are going to change and evolve, because tech is evolving and moving very quickly. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this feedback with then the main takeaways. Would you stay with us during the break? They've already left. Will you stay with us during the break? Because I think there'll be undoubtedly many people who would like to continue to have discussion with you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I had mentioned his presence in the opening of our meeting, and it is a great pleasure for me to welcome the unscrutable actor when it comes to artificial intelligence. May I ask you to welcome the Chief Scientific Officer of Groupe Renault, Luc Julia.
Bonjour, Monsieur Julia.
Good afternoon, Mr. Julia. Thank you very much for being with us. Okay, to get started, a little micro test. Yes, a test of your microphone. Fine, it's working well. So that is to get started on artificial intelligence. You don't say artificial intelligence. You prefer to say augmented intelligence. And why is that? Artificial intelligence doesn't exist. That's a problem because one talks all the time about it, but I'm Luc Julia, and I'm the only one in this room with a Hawaiian shirt, but that's normal because I'm here to break the rules, and I've broken them quite well already. So what I'm going to do today is to talk about artificial intelligence and to tell you that artificial intelligence does not exist. Well, at least that the one that we've been talked about for 10 years. It's the Hollywood's artificial intelligence that we hear about, that of Terminator and her films. This is artificial intelligence which is going to be making the headlines in newspapers, and artificial intelligence that makes us either dream or makes us scared. But that's the AI that doesn't exist. I'm going to talk about artificial intelligences with an S. Augmented intelligence is what I'm going to talk about and look at it through history. The minister spoke about, alluded to history, and I will talk about the history of artificial intelligence. In 1956 is when very intelligent scientists, researchers decided to call this field into artificial intelligence. They succeeded, they thought they'd succeeded in modelizing mathematically, statistically, a neuron. And they said, well, we have a neuron, we now have a network of neurons, and if we have a network of neurons, then you have a brain. If you have a brain, you have intelligence. So they've made a model from a mathematical point of view of intelligence. But this was stupid. They didn't realize that immediately, and I'll tell you why. I'll explain to you why. But first of all, we'll try and reflect and see what they were actually trying to do. What they were trying to do actually was that they were trying to automate tasks that seemed to be intellectual tasks, that seemed intelligent tasks. But if you actually reflect upon it, it's not in 1956 that we started to do so, but from time immemorial. In the antiquity, there were certainly machines that were trying to modelize, capture this intelligence. But as I'm French and the Frenchy, basic Frenchy, I tried to take it back to 1642. What happened in 1642? Well, Pascal, mathematician, philosopher, French, invented the Pascaline. Pascaline is the first calculator. It used to do additions and subtractions. It didn't seem complicated at the face of it, but it was quite intelligent because immediately if I tell you if 789 plus 1044, how much does that make? No, well, Pascaline in 1642 would have given you the answer in 4 seconds. You couldn't. I'm quite disappointed from where I am standing, but that's not okay, my problem. But reflect upon what this means. Well, he would have got the right answer in 4 seconds. That was high time you came up with the answers. Somebody actually came with the answer from the room. Okay, so not only did the machine get the right answer, and even if you've done mental calculation, 60% of the time you would have got the answer wrong. But okay, I'm not going to go into this, but just going to try and understand that this intelligent machine, these so-called intelligent machines, we want to believe they're intelligent. They've been around for a long, we've been trying to get them for a very long time. So let me come back to my friends of 1956. Not only did they call it artificial intelligence, they should never have called that AI, because it's got nothing to do with intelligence. And then they were actually dealing with a field which was the most complicated thing they could actually be delving into. Because they said, we're going to resolve, thanks to AI, we're going to resolve natural language. What's that? That's what we're doing now, somebody talking with words, and you're trying to understand the words. Understanding the words is complicated, and understanding the meaning is even more complicated. In 1956, with the little neurons that they had tried to make a mathematical model of, didn't really succeed. But the problem is that they lied. That science lied and disappointed us, and it took us to the first winter of AI. What is the first winter of AI? It's when you don't believe in it because they lied to you and there's no financing for it. And so, as it was mentioned, you got to finance things for them to move ahead. And so there came the winter of AI, and no research was being done. And that is what is actually imminent, even now, because this generic AI, this AI that is in the headlines of the media, we don't believe in it, or we are scared of it, and we risk stopping any financing of it if we keep saying any old thing about it. When you leave the room and you stop talking about AI in any old way and say really what it is, and you'll have to say what I'm going to tell you it is now. Now, the truth is that in the 1960s, no AI, the winter of AI, no statistics, AI statistics. 1956, when this model through mathematical function of our neurons. But there's a new AI that comes slowly but surely, which is the logical AI. You've all heard about it, logical AI, which comes at the end of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And that was what was called for a long time expert systems. Oh, impressive. That's logic. It's logic now. That's interesting. You'll have a base of rules and something that's going to say, well, if this, then you've got logical sort of things that follow, and the machine begins to reason on the basis of the data that has been fed, the rules that have been fed. But the network starts to doing things that are interesting. And the apex was in 1997 when the machine, Deep Blue of IBM, bought played chess with Kasparov and beat him. Amazing, amazing. Now, I don't know whether playing chess is intelligent. That's questionable. But what is for sure is that it is something that's quite fantastic. Playing, chess is complicated. There's basic rules that you have to follow and do what you require it to do. But there's a lot of different moves, 10 to the power of 49. That's a lot of moves. But 97, you start having some big machines with a lot of memory. And you can put a lot of these moves in the memory. And then suddenly you have the capacity to calculate, which allows you to calculate the distance between any step, any place on the chessboard right up to victory. And so the machines are able to do this thanks to these rules and these basic rules and these expert systems. And so very impressive. A machine beats Kasparov, and it's always ahead of Kasparov. All of this to say that the machine is intelligent and the machine beats Kasparov. what I'll tell you, you've understood that the machine is not all that intelligent. Anyway, we'll continue with the history, and something else happens in the 1990s, something extraordinary, which put back on the stage what happened in the 50s, what we began to call machine learning, this statistical artificial intelligence. So what happened in the 1990s is the arrival of the Internet. What does Internet arrive with? With a lot of data, good or not good, we'll see later, it depends, but it comes with a lot of data, and so this big data actually allows you to make statistics, and the statistics is what you do when you do machine learning, and a little later, 10 odd years later, what arrives is deep learning. Now, deep learning needs even more data, much more data, and the machine is very big, needs this to do this. So you'll take me for a crazy guy, but in the year 2000, there was a lot of images of cats, right? Why? Because everybody was taking pictures of cats and saying, it's my kitty, it's my cat. And so you found yourself with an annotated database. Annotating, that's important. That's the truth. Do they still have truth on internet today? That's questionable. But at that time, we had an extraordinary database of cats, which allowed us to prove statistical methods and therefore to see that we were actually able to create an artificial intelligence of machine learning that was going to recognize cats. Extraordinary. With 100,000 cats, we were able to recognize cats up to 98%. That was intelligent. I don't like cats, I don't really care. But what I was interested in this story is that we were actually able to have a machine that was going to recognize cats up to 98%. Now that is intelligent, that's extraordinary. No, it's quite stupid, really, because you have to realize what it is to recognize cats. Do you know what my 2-year-old daughter, does to recognize cats? How many cats does she need to recognize cats? Any idea? 1? 3? Okay, it's 2. She needs 2 cats. According to psychologists, people who look at people, the cogniticians will tell you need 2 cats to recognize a cat, and not 98%, not 100%. We recognize a cat all the time. You even recognize cats when you see them in the night. In the dark. Well, the machine does not recognize cats in the night because nobody has posted any pictures of cats in nighttime. And I'm going to take a picture of a cat in the night and post it on Facebook. No. So the machine does not recognize cats in the night. The machine doesn't recognize cats that are drawn by Picasso. Nor do I, rather, but anyway. The truth is that now we are a machine that we recognize a cat 100% with just 2 images. So these artificial intelligences that we talk about and we, praise have nothing to do with our intelligence. The methods of artificial intelligence have nothing to do with our intelligence, with methods that we use. And what is more, what I'm demonstrating is that another example that's going to prove to you what I'm saying is what's happening in 2016. So we take a leap forward, come to 2016, is the Go world champion who was beaten by the machine. Go world champion, go, It's funny. Go is rigolo, rhymes in French, but does it in English. So if you ask a mathematician how many moves in Go, 10 to the power of 49 in chess, if you ask him in how many moves in Go, be a little less sure, between 10 to the power of 200 and 10 to the power of 600. It's a bit of a difference there. But basically that means that there's an infinite number of moves. 10 to the power of 200 is a lot. 10 to the power of 200 is not 4 times 10 to the power of 49. I tried to explain, but it was a bit long. Anyway, so we're not going to go into that calculation, but 10 to the power of 200 is a lot. It's a lot, yes. It's infinite. Why is it infinite? Because there are moves in Go that has never been played in the game before. I mean, you know. Okay, anyway. So Go is complicated other than being fun or funny. And the Go World Champion is very good. But there's so many moves possible that you can't have the same method as the one that you'd used with the Deep Blue. Now it's DeepMind of Google. And DeepMind has to use other methods, which is not that of expert systems, but methods, statistical methods. So we'll have the machine, you know, swallow lots of Go games and set the rules. Technique is not as interesting. We're going to look at the machine itself. AlphaGo is the one that DeepMind functions on. So we're going to look at its entrails, its innards. And there's 1,600 CPUs. Those are the chips that you have in your computers, 1,500. And 300 GPUs, they're chips, but they are graphic, okay? Good for machine learning. And then you have another, the TPUs, 30 TPUs. Those have been specially done by Google, which are chips which do TensorFlow for deep learning. So 2,000 computers to play Go. That's 440 kilowatts to play Go. A small data center unto itself. That's incredible. So the question that's going to arise is, that's fine, but the little Korean who was beaten by the machine, what did he have? Like all of you, you know? That's all we have. How many watts? 440 kilowatts. How many for all? Not all, but most of us in general. We are at 20 watts against 440 kilowatts. Well, 20 watts worked for thousands of years, for a few years to learn Go. 20,000 times more. And the DeepMind machine only plays Go. The young little Korean plays Go. He talks. He does natural language. He can speak, you know. He cooks. He does so many other things. We are creating machines which are undoubtedly interesting, but we'll have to be super careful because we're talking about ecological transition and the fact that we have to be careful, technology, digital transformation. There'll be a moment where we'll have to think about how we use the artificial intelligence. Yes, digital is good, but sometimes it takes a lot of resources. In data, as we saw, 100,000 images of cats to be able to recognize a cat, 440 kilowatts to be able to play a game of Go. Sometime you'll have to make a choice, and we can make those choices. We, the society, once we're educated, once we understand how things actually work, we'll have to make those choices.
Well, let's continue with data, because all these anecdotes that I'm telling you, all these artificial intelligences that are really popular now, well, now we're mainly talking about machine learning and deep learning, and all these machines, they need a lot of data. And we saw that with the cat example earlier on, but for the last 20 years, we've added so many more possibilities. And so we're building systems for absolutely everything. In medicine, for example, and in other fields. And these systems need a lot of data. But the problem is that this data, by definition, is historical data. I don't have tomorrow's data, of course. And the problem with historical data is that maybe that they're no longer valid today. I don't know. Give you an example, which I think will speak to you in the world of banking. A recent example of a credit card company which asked a computer, an AI, to decide for them what credit line they should have on their credit cards. So he told the AI, choose, depending on different criteria, their people's profession and age, choose how much of a credit line can we give these people. And the curious thing is that compared to men, women were awarded half the credit line, which is strange. Well, no, actually, it's not strange. It's history. It's what it was like in the last 50 years. Women used to get half as much credit as men. And the AI took the data, and that's what it did. It gave 50% credit lines to women. Good or bad, I'm not the one who's deciding this. If it's you, of course, we don't think it's a good thing. But that's a problem with this data, is that this is historical data and it doesn't reflect today's society. Another society, which I think is also interesting, is an example from 2016. And it was a machine that was a robot, a chatbot on Twitter that was developed by Microsoft. Microsoft said, we're going to build this chatbot to promote our products on Twitter. Great idea. So they spent some months developing this chatbot. They put it on Twitter. The chatbot starts working, and after 16 hours, they switched it off. Why? Well, because in the history of chatbots, which of course is a short history, well, this chatbot became the most sexist and racist chatbot in the history of humanity. The chatbot started insulting women, insulting black people. Why? This makes no sense. Of course, that Microsoft didn't want to create a chatbot that would insult women and black people. Like, that's why they had to switch it off immediately. But how can you explain this? Well, there's two factors. Well, first of all, this first factor is a logical programming issue. When you create a chatbot, you create an interactive system. And in so doing, you are sometimes too adapted to the public you're talking to. There's a factor of adaptability which adapts to a given public. And I'm sure that on Twitter, after one or two interactions, you start insulting each other. And that's what the chatbot did. After one or two interactions, started insulting people. Well, OK, that's not very serious. So what we can do in that situation is you can change the slider. You can control the interaction a bit better. And you'll make it say what you wanted to say. But then there's another bug that's much more complicated, which I'll call a data bug. Well, and a data problem means that this chatbot was using the wrong data. Well, and what happened is that dialogues are much more complicated to find on the internet, much more difficult to find than a cat. There's no annotated or commented dialogue on the internet that you could just take and then feed it into the machine in order to create an interactive system. You need to have something that already exists somewhere, like a database that has existed since the 50s, and it's called Switchboard. Switchboard is a annotated conversation database of normal people, of everyday people, who called a call center, and their conversations were recorded. So they're calling call centers because of problems with their TV or their fridge. And so there's millions of conversations since the 50s that have been recorded in this database. It's a public database. And most people who work on these interactive systems, like myself, we use this database in our work. And so what probably happened at Microsoft is the people working there, when they wanted to program this chat bot, they probably used Switchboard. That's the normal thing, the logical thing to do. And of course, there's millions of conversations on Switchboard, so they didn't need that many, so they took a subset of this data set. So they maybe took the beginning of the database, the 50s, in where else? Alabama, maybe. I can see some of you are laughing, because sometimes when I say the 50s Alabama, younger people sometimes don't really understand what I'm referring to, but I'm happy you've understood. So the database, by its very nature, the model was racist from its very nature. So you just needed a few sparks to set off this negative spiral. So it's very complicated to choose the right data. Because even in this word I've used, when I say choose data, it's a problem. Because if you think, as I do, if you think that a database is biased, whatever happens is because it's biased by history. If you believe this, well, then you'll try and balance it out, to tweak things, to change things. What does that mean? Are you going to introduce your own bias? And if you introduce your own bias into the machine, well, things get a bit complicated. And that's where you have to talk about ethics, because you'll say, well, I'm right. I'm going to introduce my ethics, or the ethics of my company, or the ethics of my AI state, which might be called a piece of legislation, and this can very quickly become very complicated because depending on continents, countries, people, we're not all going to have the same ethics. So when we're creating systems, you have to keep this in mind, that there are problems and they will have to be regulated. The energy will have to be regulated, and the data use will also have to be regulated. I think I made a little mistake. Oh, there it is. Other thing that's important when you're creating these AI systems, we often talk about the black box. We say that AI is a black box. We don't really understand what it does, and so we can't really trust it. And it's true, you can't trust a black box. However, it's not true that AI is a black box. It's a black box for most of us at a given moment. That's why we're here today, to try and understand a bit, to understand what AI is. No, of course, we're not all going to become AI experts, but at least we want to understand it a bit. And all these technologies at different stages of humanity, when new things were invented, at any given moment, some of these technologies were black boxes. And so I'd like to tell you a story, which is the story of Gaston Julia, who was a brilliant mathematician who lived at the beginning of the 20th century. And in 1914, he discovered fractals. Now, fractals, if you know what they are, if you know what it is, you've seen something appeared in your mind when I said that word. And if you don't know what a fractal is, go on Wikipedia and check it out. And so Julia discovers or invents fractals, and it's a logarithmic equation. And if you're not a mathematician and you see the equation, you can't understand it at all. It's complete gibberish to you. And if you're a mathematician and you look at the fractal, the equation, well, it takes your breath away. You discover an extraordinary property, and it really excites you. Well, apparently people in the room here are not really mathematicians, but mathematicians are very much excited by this, and they were excited by this for about 40 years, and they were alone in that, because for other people it was a black box. It's something that was unexplainable for most normal mortals if you didn't know mathematics. And then in the 50s, he had a brilliant student called Benoit Mandelbrot, and he traveled to the US to work at IBM. He was working on one of the first computers. And he inputs Julia's equation into the computer. He names it the Mandelbrot equation at the time. And then suddenly what appears on the screen is this wonderful fern. And for those of you who've who know what a fractal is, it's this beautiful fern that turns into other ferns and like ad infinitum. But it took 40 years for the black box, the mathematical black box, for it to become transparent for everyone. Now, I'm not saying that in 40 years we'll be able to see transparent boxes for all AIs, but we're working on this because we want humans to trust AIs. And that's why we need to explain them. There's nothing that's unexplainable. There's only local things that can't be explained, and so only for a given period of time. But now I'd like to tell you about autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. Maybe I pressed the wrong button here. Oh, yeah. So self-driving cars. So autonomous vehicles is even worse than AI. This is something that they've been going on and about since 2018, especially one guy called Elon Musk. For him, this is something that just happened yesterday. I don't know if you know what Tesla is, but autonomous vehicles isn't something that just started yesterday. Now, what we call the level 5 autonomous vehicles, these are the vehicles that can do everything by themselves. They're fully self-driving. This car will never see the light of day. It will never happen. And I can prove this to you. That's why you have to stay with me, because I'll give you proof of this. And when you leave the room, you'll be able to tell your friends, you know, self-driving cars, never going to happen. level 4 self-driving cars, that is something that will see the light of day. It will be something extraordinary. It will be able to avoid most accidents, most crashes. It will be seen as being completely autonomous, as completely self-driving by most users, because it will very rarely need human assistance. But it will need human assistance. Now, I've got 2 examples why we won't have fully self-driving vehicles, and I'll give you 2 examples. There's one example in France. This is a place in Paris called the Arc de Triomphe at 6 p.m. It's got a huge traffic circle around it, and if you stick a self-driving car on this traffic circle, it will be stuck there till 1 a.m. It will never move forward. It will never be able to move forward for a very simple reason, and that is that self-driving cars will do things well, which means that it will follow traffic laws. If you follow traffic laws at 6 p.m. around the Arc de Triomphe, you know very well you'll never get anywhere. Being at the Arc de Triomphe at 6 p.m. is a situation where you're negotiating. It involves human psychology. It's everything except for traffic laws. Self-driving cars are built in order to follow rules, in order to do things well, to do things better than we do. But not like that. We do things well now and then because we're smart, we're sly, we know how to do things. Well, so that's my first example. Second example, which is something that works everywhere in the world, is an example that was presented by the CEO of Waymo. Waymo is the most advanced company. They don't deal with cars, but Elon Musk, you have to understand that you're only about 2.5 with the Tesla. So you're very far from this level 4 of self-driving vehicles. So the CEO of Waymo puts this data online, these millions of kilometers. So people like me, we rush to see what it's all about. Now, I didn't have time to watch all the 10 million miles, even though I put the speed of the videos at twice the speed, but it's a lot. But I did find something really special in it. So I'm in a car, and the video is on the wind screen. And so you can see, it's in a car in Mountain View. It's a boring town near Palo Alto. And there's a car that's driving around Mountain View, and nothing's really happening, except that suddenly the car stops. And 3 seconds later, it moves forward 3 meters, and then it stops again. 3 seconds later, it moves, then it stops again and keeps moving. Now, there's always an operator in the car, so the operator takes over the controls, and because obviously he's bored with stopping and going, and drives off. And so you ask yourself, why is the car stopping for no reason? So then you look at the video a bit closer, and you can see that on the sidewalk, on the pavement, going in the same direction as the car, there's 2 guys walking along the sidewalk. And if you look even closer, you can see that one of these 2 people, on his shoulder, has a stop sign. He's carrying a stop sign. So if you saw this clown walking along the road with a stop sign on his back, you wouldn't stop your car. I mean, or if you would, that means you have some problems. But a self-driving car, what does it do? Well, it sees a stop sign. And what does that mean? Well, it keeps seeing a stop sign, and that's why it stops. So the difference between us and these machines, these intelligent machines, these AIs, is that we will adapt, we will invent. Machines, they can't do that. They can't invent anything. They just repeat what has been given to them, be they rules or data. And they only do what we've told them to do. Whereas we will adapt, we will think. And it's not even really thinking, because in accidents, when there's accidents happen, when there's like emergency situations, we have reflexes, but we will react to things that we'd never experienced before. You could have intelligent machines that could react in a random way. And that is a choice you could have. That's a sort of choice of a society you want to see. But this means that these AIs are only tools. And if I want to speak about AI in general, I'd say that AI is a toolbox. It is a toolbox that contains lots of different tools that we can use in lots of different contexts. So, for example, if I need a hammer, I use as an example, it's an excellent tool. It's a tool that's useful. Hammer's great for nailing things into the wall. It hurt me less than using my fist. But I can use the hammer in a good way or in a bad way. I can attack someone with a hammer, which is a bad way of using it. But maybe I don't know that's a bad thing. Society will decide what a bad way of using a hammer is. But the hammer doesn't hit someone by itself. I'm the person who's holding the handle of the hammer. And it's the same with the AI. I'm the one who holds the controls. I'm the one who decides. Society decides with its ethics, with my rules. We decide what goes in the AI. So you have to understand is that all these AIs, they're not doing things by themselves. Unlike what the newspapers say, we decide what they do collectively. We have to understand this. Politicians need to understand this, and regulators have to be educated as well to understand how AI works, to understand what the limits are, what the dangers are. But the greatest danger at the end of the day is us. So I think I'll stop now, and we can maybe take some questions. Thank you very much. I have to admit, a very surprising ending. So we had some time dedicated to Q&A. So maybe someone in the room has any questions. I can see that someone's raising their hand at the back of the room. Please don't hesitate. If you're following us online, you can also ask us your questions. Well, thank you for this very interesting talk that reminds us of the importance of expert data in order to not just work in any which way. We all remember the Kitty database, and we regret it in many ways. But from your point of view, if the AI is only held responsible for our decision, this is something that leads us into a brick wall. And since we are in control when it comes to these decisions, do you think that in the level 4, that if we input some information, will we be able to ensure some sureness of information in its decisions? I'm sorry, I can't really understand what you're saying. Well, I'm saying if we put if we input all the events that the AI will understand, and if we teach it that if we give it a map and we tell them that a real stop panel is in this place on the street, but the thing the guy's carrying is not a real stop panel, will we be able to avoid these problems you mentioned? Well, we could add different cases which will develop the map of possibilities, which will make it more and more precise. But whatever happens, unfortunately, there will always be cases that will not be taken into account. There's something that I sometimes do where I explain that artificial intelligence, that these things are just things that are distributed discretely on an infinite line. And so even if there are AIs that are very close to each other, and you can have transfer learning between two different AIs, but unfortunately between these two discrete lines, there's something that's really annoying, and that's something called infinity. And this infinity is made up of all these cases that are impossible to predict. And that's why these AIs will never be able to be as good as we are. So will there always be a human at level 4? Yes, exactly. So in level 4, will happen is you'll be able to have a car in which there won't be a steering wheel, and so you won't have to drive it, but there'll be a remote assistance. So at a given moment, at 0.0005% of cases, there'll be a problem like the stop sign I mentioned earlier on, and so the car will stop, and it will say, I do not understand what's going on, and someone remotely, or in the car, but let's say remotely, will take control of the car. And this remote control will be responsible for 10,000 or 100,000 vehicles, because the number of these cases will be very, very low. But there will have to be a human And there will always be a human to be able to intervene, because at a given point there has to be a human to take care of this. The humans involved from the beginning because they create the machine, but they will also have to be a human to take into account these things that the car doesn't understand.
Okay, moving on, we'll have another question, and then we'll try and keep to the schedule and move to the roundtables. Thibaut Cléa, please. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to break away from AI for a minute and talk about metaverse and the announcement made by Facebook. Metaverse, is it going to change our lives? Well, metaverse, just very quickly, it's a meta universe, so a universe where you've got augmented reality and reality. This is something that has been discussed in the Silicon Valley for decades now. So Facebook has used it to make a big announcement for publicity reasons more than anything else. Is it going to change anything? Yeah, it's going to change some interactions. Some interactions are going to be more pleasant. During the pandemic, for instance, it was quite unpleasant to be online 100% of the time. Interactions were not great. Maybe with Metaverse, we will be able to have people standing virtually next to us, and we won't just be looking at our screen. We'll be able to stand, walk around, and chat with avatars. That's augmented reality for you. So Metaverse is going to exist because we've got the right technology to do this. We'll be able to navigate that technology going forward at some point. Hold on, I've got the mic. I've got a question. Where are you, sir? Over here. I've got a very practical question for you. Level 4 cars, when is that going to come about? Because Carlos Ghosn said that he said it would come about in 2022, and that's coming up really soon, and there's no level 4 cars at the minute. And what about level 4 cars on the road and their interaction with a car that is not level 4? And final question, 10 years down the line, how will we be able to drive a car? Because we will all have forgotten how to drive a car by then. Well, look, I don't want to do like Elon Musk and make big announcements and give you deadlines, but level 4 will get there quite quickly because the technology is already available. The remote technology is not there yet. So, to answer your question, when? Well, pretty soon. For your second question, having two kinds of cars on the road, level 4 and non-level 4. Well, if there's no cohabitation, if you've got these smart cities where there are no dogs, cats, humans, no one riding a bike, if you remove all of this, if you only have autonomous cars, well, you know, it's pretty much like having a train service, really. You've got train tracks and, well, it's pretty basic, in fact. But that's not going to happen. We're going to have a kind of a mixed world with humans and animals that cross the road. And you will have autonomous cars and normal cars. And some cars will perceive things in a better way than us, and they will perfectly be able to cohabitate alongside normal cars. And the last question, I can't remember what it was, but the answer is yes. Okay, one final question from the room. Okay, I'd just like to go back quickly to your conclusion on AI and the fact that there are many dangers and opportunities, and we need to really understand how all of this works. So my question is, how do we get our stakeholders, all the people who build AI projects, how can we allow them to spend enough time to understand how it all works? Well, today you've devoted 20 minutes to better understanding AI. We talked about data bias, data quality, and sessions like such as the ones that we've had today allows you to understand a bit better the issue. I'm convinced that anyone can understand what AI is all about and how it can shape our lives. Now, I'm a huge fan of democracy, and I think that people should be able to understand and then decision makers in turn understand how it works and make the right decisions. Okay, well, do stay with us, but we're going to give you a big hand, Luc, Julia. Thank you very much for this talk. And that question has just been asked by the Director of Operations and Information System at Natixis, Véronique Sani. So she's going to come up on stage. Please, a big hand for the Chief Operating Officer, Véronique Sani. Well, thank you very much, Véronique, for being here. Thank you for asking that final question of the question round. Just to tie things in with what Luc Julia has just said, and Luc, you can jump in whenever you want. At Natixis, how did you take on these different technological challenges, including AI? Well, first of all, I'd like to recall a few figures because my boss earlier said that BPCE was not a tech company, but I believe that we are a kind of tech company, or to some extent. Like, in fact, a lot of our clients said in the survey. At Natixis, we have about 5,000 people who work in IT across the world, and it's one of the main expenditure lines for the company, second or third in the ranking. We spend $1 billion a year for technology, so I think that makes us a tech company. And in our previous strategic plan, we already felt that the revolution was on the way, and our strategic plan at the time had a huge chapter on digital and cloud technology. So when we started putting some thought in the 2021-2024 strategic plan, we recalibrated this. Everybody spoke about digital, about cloud, but now we've refined it, and we have a clearer picture of what it means to us. And in the survey, in fact, we've seen it. There's this huge trend around big data, around AI and platforms. We talked a lot about APIs, and that was about a year ago when we started working on the strategic plan, and there were the mega trends that we wanted to focus on. What we didn't see coming, we sort of saw it coming, but we wanted to set it aside for later. It was blockchain technology. And for the last few months now, we've been trying to catch up because we're realizing that it's a very important issue for us all. We're not up to speed yet in the area of blockchain technology, but nonetheless, it's a trend on which we need to focus going forward. So how do we take all these challenges on? Well, first of all, in our strategic plan, we've got a whole work stream on digital transformation. In other words, on how we're going to build a business case around technology. What we are going to do is, first of all, invest to build enabler technologies. We need to build up our capacity in terms of big data. We need to have access to cloud technology. We need an API, etc., etc. So our tech teams are in charge of that. And then we have the use cases. So to tie in with what Luc was saying earlier, we need to work with our different business lines so that they understand how they can harness these technologies to create more business, more growth. So we've got dedicated teams who try to explain to the business lines the potential that the technology has, how we can speed up business through technology. So we're making a lot of progress, but like all the people who took part in the survey, we are a company that needs to completely change its corporate culture. We can't just say, okay, there's this technology out there, it's really going to work well for our business. It doesn't work like this. You need to fund the technology, you need to make it a priority for everyone. So it's not only about technology, it's also about corporate culture and about bringing about change. And this is why events such as today's event is important. There's a digital revolution ahead of us, and we need to take it on and be faster than we are. Yeah, indeed. The teams, the people really need to take ownership of these technologies. The technologies are mature. We've been using the same kind of technology for 50, 60 years, so let's get on with it. Second question. Could you give us some success stories at Natixis? Well, we've got 4 big themes: data, AI, platforms, and blockchain. So we've got a project portfolio with about 30 projects that are different levels of maturity, and I'd like to share a few projects with you today. I tried to find some projects that weren't related too closely to banking. So, for example, we've got a project on fraud detection. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in banking, we have to make sure that the flow of money respects embargo rules. With the filters that we have, we generate millions and millions of alerts every year for financial flows that might be suspicious. So if you need to appoint someone to analyze each flow that is considered as suspicious, then it would just take too much time. And 98% of them are false positives. So you could spend months and months and months with tens and dozens of people working on this. It would cost a lot. It would be not that efficient at the end of the day. So we've got a model that is kind of a simple AI model. And with that model, out of 1 million alerts, we can focus on the 7,000 that are a bit more suspicious. So we narrow it down and we can focus on these few cases that need further checking. Another example that we're currently working underway, it's a project called Jimmy. In companies, we focus a lot on skills and on skill dynamics. The jobs of the future are not going to be the same as today. We're going to need new skill sets. So, as a company, we need to have employees who can fit into these new skill sets that we will have, that we will need in the future. So with NeoBrain, a startup, we've put together a system where our employees can put their skills, what they like to do, what they have an appetite for, and we've modelized our job descriptions based on that. So we've got 2,500 people who are part of the test phase, and what we hope to achieve is to suggest jobs or positions to people who never thought that they would fit that job description. And here again, we go back to the corporate culture change, because it's true that somebody might be pushed a trader's position in New York, and it might not ever have crossed their mind to take up this opportunity, but it's going to be a huge change for sure. And there's also another technological megatrend that is appearing on the horizon. Is what I call green IT, or responsible digital technology. And Luc, in fact, you mentioned it quickly in your presentation earlier. This is something that we're also going to have to grapple with. What we've decided at Natixis is to introduce in the tech validation processes a criteria that allows us to look at how much a project cost before validation, but also what impact it's going to have in terms of carbon footprint. In other words, has it got a good carbon footprint or a not so good carbon footprint? So this is still in the test phase, and we're going to see whether it steers our investments in a different manner and whether it allows our investors to make greener decisions. Well, that's it for this AI session. Thank you very much to Véronique Sani, and Luc Julia for his presentation.